Do some words just sound bad? The Arbitrariness of Language. Part 2, Conventions. In the previous video, I talked about how sounds are created. In this video, we're going to be looking at how those sounds get associated with meaning through social conventions, arbitrary social conventions. And when I talk about conventions, I don't mean that a bunch of people got together and voted on how we should connect cat to the feline pet and dog to the canine pet. No, it happens more organically than that. It evolves over time. That's how language happens. In the previous video, I talked about how we create speech sounds by bringing air into our lungs, goes up through the vocal tract. We manipulate that sound to create different speech sounds, different compressions in the air, ultimately. Now we're going to look at language as an arbitrary sign system. This goes back to the founder of modern linguistics, Ferdinand de Saussure. And de Saussure had this theory of language as a sign system. And signs are composed of two parts, the signifier and the signified. The signifier is the form. And since we're talking about spoken language, it's the sound form. And then the signified is the meaning or the function of that sign. Now, when we're talking about language, we're talking about arbitrary signs. But of course, not all signs are arbitrary. So for example, if you go to a doctor because you've got little red spots all over your body, the doctor may say, oh, you have chicken pox. And those spots are a sign of the illness that you have. But it's not an arbitrary sign. There's a causal relationship. The viral infection causes those spots. Or so say that you hear thunder and you say, oh, it's going to rain. There you're thinking of thunder as a sign that it's going to rain. But again, there's a causal relationship, or not a causal, but a correlative relationship. The thunder generally accompanies rain because the sorts of clouds that produce rain are also the same sorts of clouds that produce thunder. Those are natural signs. The sorts of signs that we're talking about, though, are just purely arbitrary signs. So think about when Fonzie does his thumbs up, right? There's nothing about having our thumbs in that position that means something like good, except for an agreement that that's what it means. Now, in some places, it can mean other things as well. So in a different context, going like that may mean I want to ride. Or in certain parts of Europe, it could mean the number one, right? So it could have been anything else. And that's the hallmark of arbitrariness. It just happens that we, as a society, agreed, we have a convention, that when you go like this, at least in the right context, it means good. Now, of course, that's not language. Instead, we can think about another sort of signifier and signified. In this case, I'm thinking about the string of sounds b, a, n, e. Now, what you see here on the screen is what we call the IPA system. We'll talk a lot more about this when we get into phonetics, but that funny upside down V represents the sound, and the I at the end of it doesn't represent the sound that we associate with that symbol in the English alphabet. Rather, it represents the sound E. So in the IPA system, each symbol represents a particular specific sound. That's at the signifier level. At the signified level, it just is that image that we've got of what a bunny looks like, right? What it is. So that's our meaning. And again, it could have been anything else. In fact, it used to be, we used to actually use the word cunny instead of bunny. Now, how the C became a B is actually very interesting, but you'll have to take my class, Bad Words and Taboo Terms, to find out about how that came about. Again, the point is that we arbitrarily associate the string of sounds with a particular meaning, even when we're talking about things that seem more iconic, that seems like we're not talking about something that is purely arbitrary, like, for example, animal sounds. Now, the thing is, even then, there's an element of arbitrariness. So think about the sound that a donkey makes. It goes, hee-haw, right? Now, that's how it says in English. If we were to go to France, it wouldn't say hee-haw. The reason is because in France, they don't have that H sound. That sound just doesn't exist in the language. So it's not part of their linguistic system. Therefore, it couldn't be a word of French. Moreover, it's not a perfect imitation of a donkey. You're not going to go out into a barnyard and say hee-haw and expect that the donkey is going to turn around and go, where's that donkey? Where's that other donkey? Right? No, you're not fooling anybody. It's still English when you say hee-haw. Now, as I understand it, there are people who can convincingly imitate a donkey to the point that they would confuse a donkey. But at that point, they're not using English any longer or any human language. They are communicating as a donkey at that point, in the same way that a parrot is imitating human language when it makes those sounds. Doesn't mean that they actually know what the sounds represent in terms of the signified, but they're just good at imitating those sounds. So I do want to emphasize that when we make sounds of a language, they have to be part of that language. They have to be things that belong to that language. And that's something we're going to talk a lot about when we get into phonology. For now, I just want to re-emphasize that point that there is nothing that naturally connects any string of sounds to any particular meaning. That only comes about through society.